Ladies and gentlemen, I want to begin tonight by saying how touched I am to know that Tip wanted me here this evening. Why, he even called me himself last week and said, "Mr. President, make sure you don't miss the dinner Tuesday night." But to be honest, I've always known that Tip was behind me. Even it was only at the State of the Union address. As I made each proposal, I could hear Tip whispering to the George Bush, "Forget it. No way. Fat chance."
Good morning. It is Thursday, December the 22nd, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the daily declaration for spiritual warfare, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have hypocrisy, Tucker Carlson, Alex-Epstein, news and editorials, no free lunch, and Jinx, Chapter 22. All that and more when I get back. Thank you. And now, the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare, Biblical Principles to Defeat the Devil for December 22nd. Lord, you have redeemed my life from the pit and have crowned me with love and compassion. You long to be gracious to me. You rise to show me compassion. You are a God of justice. I will wait for you and be blessed. Through your mercies we are not consumed, and your compassions fail not. Amen. And that was the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for December 22nd.
Your heart, face your parents, ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing and remove your hats for the national anthem of the United States of America.
Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleam? Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, all the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets was bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does the star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free
Thank you. And now, there's no free lunch.
Most of Marx's predictions have failed to materialize, and his labor theory of value and other ideas have been proven wrong. Marx failed to recognize the incentive system built into the capitalist model, consumer choice, and the profit motive of the entrepreneur. The irony is that capitalism, not socialism or Marxism, that has liberated the worker from the chains of poverty, monopoly, war, and oppression, has better achieved Marx's vision of a millennium of hope, peace, abundance, leisure, and aesthetic expression for the full human being. Dr. Mark Skousen. The Marxian idea that value is determined by the labor necessary to create it is wrong for a number of reasons. For the advocate of free enterprise, it is the incentives of the system that most rationalize productive human action. If we truly champion liberation from oppression, our economic aims must be the cultivation of liberty and facilitation of incentives that drive such liberation.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. So, news items. The top news items that I had from this morning that I saw on the Varney and Company, I believe is the name of the show, on Fox. And one of them was, I think the first thing was this guy, that they nicknamed SBF, Sam Brinkman-Fried, I guess is his name. And first of all, no conservative should be referring to Sam Brinkman-Fried as SBF. That's a lefty thing. They like to abbreviate and try to make everything kind of cryptic and make it seem like you got to understand our lingo to be on the inside kind of a situation. And no, we don't. The left needs to learn how to speak English. Okay, so the proper way to refer to him is either Sam Brinkman-Fried, his whole name, or Mr. Fried. That's the conservative thing to do. So the other part of this is they make it a big deal as though this is a national situation. I suppose if you have money or had money in his company, his crypto company, then it's a big deal. But how many people did? For me, minding my own business, I didn't have any money in his company. I don't have any money, to be candid about it, in crypto. I don't go for crypto. I think the whole thing is beyond my understanding at a minimum. And they say the wise men in Washington or in New York in the Wall Street area say never invest in something you don't understand. So I stay away from Mr. Fried and all of his associates and the other players. And if you get involved in that kind of thing, you have to do your due diligence. And even if you do your due diligence, because there's a guy from the show, what is it, where people come out and they're looking for investors, right? And he's, I can't remember his name. But anyways, he was on TV and he's well-known, popular, and he's also been on CNBC, and he's a fairly shrewd investor, and he got took. He put a bunch of money into this organization, and he's talked openly, frankly, about the experience, why he got into it, how he thinks that the company ended up going bankrupt. His theory is that there was a rivalry between the SFX or SBX or whatever the name of the company is and a rival company, and that the rival company just simply went ahead and through various machinations put Mr. Fried's company out of business. Just set things up so as to guarantee that Mr. Fried would end up going bankrupt. And so it happened. But again, one of the things that you want to always do as a conservative is ask, so what? Why? I don't know why, again, this has got to be a big deal, other than the fact, the only reason I guess it is a big deal is because he was a big shot on Capitol Hill. He had his picture taken with various members of Congress and whatnot. Even then, I say, so what? Congress people get duped all the time. They shake hands with and are taking pictures with people that turn out to be problem children, let's put it that way, all the time. It happens. You can't vet, I guess, or screen people so closely that you can't guarantee that you can prevent this kind of thing. It's embarrassing, no doubt about it. But Mr. Freed, no big deal. The next thing was Zelensky, and I had the same thing with Zelensky. I've already talked some about Zelensky and saying, again, if it was me and I'm the president of the United States, I'm not sending them any help other than medical help. Because when we get involved in wars, we have a tendency to allow ourselves to get sucked in. Right now they're talking about giving Patriot missiles to Ukraine. And they say that those Patriot missile batteries have to be manned by American troops. So you see how this goes? We send the sophisticated weaponry to a place, whether it's Vietnam or it's Ukraine. Then we have to send advisors because the morons don't know how to use the weapons. So we have to send advisors to teach them how to use the weapons. And then eventually we end up in a situation where we have to put American boots on the ground. And this is how we slowly but surely get sucked into a war we don't really want to be involved in the first place. Because all they're fighting about is trivial issues of nationalism, of minor differences in culture. There's also some talk from various people about how, it was the guy on the radio, who said that we have to get involved. We can't allow Russia to overtake and take over Ukraine because Ukraine has all kinds of resources. So what? There's resources all over the world. There's resources in Africa. There's resources in South America, in Australia, in the United States of America, for that matter. Okay, so whatever resources that we're going to find it hard to get from the Ukraine via Russia, if Russia takes over, we're going to have to get somewhere else. I mean, that's just the way it is. So what? It's not worth it to get sucked into yet another war. We just got done with Afghanistan and with Iraq, and we don't need another war. And we need not get sucked into this. We just keep a distance, send them medical aid, maybe get one of those hospital ships to sit offshore so that they can send their wounded to something of that nature. We can do things that are humanitarian in nature, but we do not need to and should not get involved militarily. And then that brings us to the third big news item, which is spending. The $1.7 trillion omnibus spending bill that the Senate has passed. Now, I always understood, I can't understand this, how it is that the Senate is starting this, because my understanding is all spending bills are supposed to start, according to the Constitution, in the House of Representatives. But this started in the Senate. It was passed by the Senate, apparently almost along party lines. There's about 18 Republican senators that went along with it, so it passed, and now it's gone over to the House for a vote. So, and it's expected to pass because, after all, Democrats still run the House. And since President Biden likes this bill and wants it, then Nancy Pelosi, of course, is going to come through for President Biden. But $1.7 trillion. The other thing that the Republicans can do, the right-thinking Republicans, is emphasize the fact that the money that we're going to be giving for this bill is going to be borrowed. We're going to be printing money and or borrowing it. We're going to sell bonds. And so we're going to have to pay interest on those bonds. And the interest that we're spending on those bonds, and there's a figure tonight where they say that we, in the last year, spent over $440 billion just on interest payments. Now stop and think, what kind of programs, how many programs? Matter of fact, you could probably run an entire department, federal department. You could run you might even be able to run the Defense Department with $440 billion. So instead of saying, well, we got to stop this because of what might happen or could happen down the line, let's talk about what is happening and create a sense of urgency. That's one of the reasons why people don't do anything, is because the Republicans refuse to create any sense of urgency. Also, and because of that, and because they're always making predictions instead of making value judgments, then the Republicans end up in a situation where they're making a prediction, the prediction doesn't come true, and then they make another prediction, that doesn't come true. Another prediction after that, it doesn't come true. So right now, the Republican Party has no integrity, no credibility on the budget. None. Zero. That's another reason why people don't get terribly excited. Because the only people that are saying boo about the budget are people that have no credibility. So that's the importance of credibility. If you want people to listen to you, if you want people to take you seriously, you must maintain your integrity. You must maintain your credibility. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm listening to Frank Sontag, who's subbing for... who is he subbing for? Oh, the Leo Terrell 2.0. And he's talking about mask mandates. He says, there's mask mandates in some states is passed a thing. And he says, and it's relevant because it could happen here. And it isn't. It's not. The first question to ask is, when you hear something like this, is so what? So what? So what? Big deal. They passed mask mandates in Kansas. It has nothing to do with me here in California. If they do go ahead and do mask mandates in California, realize, or in your state, wherever you happen to be living, is realize they have no authority and they won't dare order you to mask up when you're at home. That's the only thing that's relevant, because all of this is a property issue. So many of people get it wrong. So many ersatz conservatives get it wrong. They think that we have a right to go on to somebody else's property and tell them how to run their lives. And we don't. Whether it is public property run by the city, or if it's a store, something that's open to the public, it's somebody else's property. If they want you to wear a mask, you either wear a mask or go somewhere else. Okay? The only thing that's really important is, what is the rule when it comes to your own home? If they have a mandate that says, once they come up with a mandate that says you have to wear a mask in your own home, guess what? I'm going to defy that. I'm going to defy it. And I dare them to come and haul me away to jail or arrest me for it. I dare you. And until that happens, it's nothing. It's nothing to get worked up about. It's nothing to get excited about. It really doesn't matter. Back in a minute. Thank you. And listening to Frank Sontag again, he is allowing people to call into the show. And one lady he introduced saying he didn't know what it is that she wanted to criticize him about. But anyway, so she gets on the air and calls him a hypocrite. And I don't need to listen to the rest of it, because I know he's going to handle it absolutely incorrectly. This is being called a hypocrite is one of the ways that the right is intimidated into silence. Okay? And it doesn't have to be that way. It didn't used to be, and it doesn't have to be. Okay? So if somebody tells you you're a hypocrite, you say, yes, so what? Stop and think about it. If I'm a smoker and I tell children not to smoke, am I a hypocrite? Absolutely. So what? If I'm a reformed drinker, I used to drink all the time and party all the time, and I tell people you shouldn't drink, it's not good for you. Am I a hypocrite? In a manner of speaking, yes. And especially if I'm a drinker that I'm still drinking, and I'm telling other people don't drink because it's bad for you, particularly young people. I'm being a hypocrite. So what? We're all hypocrites to one degree or another. So, don't allow anybody to intimidate you with the hypocrite argument. You just say, sure, so what? So what? And you'll watch them choke on their own accusation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now 2 minutes of Tucker Carlson about the Nord Stream pipeline.
Remember when Joe Biden told us about Nord Stream? There were two stories. The first story was Joe Biden promised to blow up Nord Stream, the pipeline that brought natural gas from Russia to Western Europe. He's going to blow it up. Do you remember that? You're not allowed to remember it, but we remember it, and we saved the tape. Here it is.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly? Since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control.
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
Yeah, so he said it on tape. I'm going to do to that pipeline what I did to Corn Pop at the pool at Wilmington. I'm going to take a chain to it. So he promises to destroy the pipeline, and then so does his number two at the State Department, Tory Nuland, will destroy the pipeline, and then the pipeline is destroyed. And that hurts Russia. It eliminates Russia's leverage over Europe. Okay, so we know how that happened. But no, they told us. Russia did it. Putin blew up his own pipeline. That's how evil he is. That's how much destruction he wreaks. He doesn't just attack others, he attacks himself. Okay, now. That's what they told us. And some of us had questions about it. Is that really what happened? Oh, Michael Beschloss and his friends didn't like that. Anyone who asked questions about what happened to Nord Stream, which, by the way, sent more carbon into the atmosphere than any man-made event in history, so if you care about the climate, maybe be a little worried about what just happened in Nord Stream. If you suggested that the administration, the Biden administration, had anything to do with that, including prior knowledge of it, you were a Russian agent. Really? Is that right? Can you fill us in a little bit more? No, you're working for Putin. Foreign Policy Magazine, which used to be a real magazine, called any questions about what happened in Nord Stream a Kremlin talking point. Wow. Could it be they were lying? Oh, yeah, they were lying. Oh, they were lying. The Washington Post, of all places, now reporting, and we're quoting, some Western officials now doubt the Kremlin was responsible. Oh, you think? There's, quote, no conclusive evidence that Russia is behind the Nord Stream attack. Okay, so it's a binary here. It's Russia against a Western coalition led by the United States. So either Russia blew up the Nord Stream pipeline or the Biden administration had a hand in blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. Those are your two options. So if Russia didn't do it, then the people who suggested maybe the Biden people were behind it were 100% right.
Thank you, Mr. Tucker Carlson. So again, the first test here for any true conservative is to ask the question, so what? Now, if he talks about politicians lying to us, okay, there's good reason to care about that. That's obvious. But it doesn't exactly rate with Japan's surrenders, does it? Politicians lie to us on a regular basis and have been doing so for over 200 years. So when we get to the pipeline, though, that's a question that's a little bit harder to answer. Who cares in the United States of America? I understand why Europe would care, because that's a pipeline that is supposed to give the Europeans natural gas so they can heat their homes in the wintertime. But it's not for Massachusetts or anyone else in the United States. Now, unless we're going to be asked to spend money to clean up the effects of it or to replace it or something of that nature, again, I still just don't understand what's the point. Who cares? Back in a minute. Thank you. Now 2 minutes of Alex Epstein on, let's see, whose show is he on here? It is Glenn Beck.
This is going to change their life.
Well, I would just ask, have you ever been really poor?
Yes, he has, Alex. He has. I've seen it. I've seen it in action. I have.
No, I'm just saying, like most of us, even who have had success, have had periods where we didn't have much money. I certainly had that in my life, and it will be much, much worse than that. I mean, this is the thing, because you have the element of just becoming much poorer, which people experience even with modest rises in gasoline prices. You cannot afford as much. But part of it's not just it's this combination of you become poorer, but also you are in a society that is disintegrating. And so what you're like, look at Sri Lanka and other places where you have these riots. What happens is the decline is not this just smooth thing where, okay, I made $100,000 and now I make $60,000. It is chaos. I mean, you just look around the world. Every time you have these fuel price crises, it is chaos. And it's not like America is in a particularly stable state right now, politically or
I had
socially.
noticed.
So we don't. This is not what we need. Now, the nice thing is we have all the physical resources in the world to produce enough energy for a lot of people to have a good life. Like, this is totally a political, I mean, it's cultural beneath that, but it's a political phenomenon.
Yes.
So we can produce a lot more fossil fuel. We can produce nuclear energy. We can pursue what I call energy freedom. And that's a lot of my work right now, besides, making clear this idea of a fossil future, is promoting energy freedom policies so that we can get there and also get to new alternatives.
Thank you. And so one of the things that I wanted to bring up is he talks a little bit about nuclear energy. And there was somebody that was on earlier that was talking about how nuclear energy, it was the Green Party was nixing the nuclear energy program in the United States. And it's not true. It is just absolutely not true, because that small of an organization, because the Green Party amounts to nothing. And even if you put together all the members of Greenpeace and other organizations, again, it amounts to nothing. So the reason that we don't have as much nuclear power as people like Alex-Epstein would like is because of, let's put it in one word, and that's Chernobyl. See, people like Alex-Epstein have no answers for Chernobyl. They also, even if you want to put Chernobyl aside and you want to say, well, that's just a one-off, you still have the issue of spent fuel rods. And what do we do with them? We still don't have an answer for that. Right now, we're sticking them in the middle of a mountain in Nevada. And then people that live in Nevada don't like that. They don't want that to be happening. They want to get rid of all that and are trying to. So what do we do with it? See, the problem with nuclear energy is if you make one mistake, it could be fatal. And not only fatal, but in the case of Chernobyl, that area of land there is uninhabitable for maybe 200,000 years. That's a hell of a price to pay for a single mistake. Okay? And that's what Alex Epstein and others are not addressing. The American people are terrified, and rightfully so, that some type of a Chernobyl is going to happen in the United States of America, and that a huge part of our country may end up being off limits for millennia. And that's just unacceptable. Like I said, and even if you want to put those concerns aside as being 1 in a million, what's not 1 in a million is that you've got to do something with the spent fuel rods. And nobody has come up with an answer to that. Nobody's come up with a solution to that. So what I'm saying is that the reason we don't have more nuclear energy in the United States is because nobody wants it. I don't want it. Okay, Chernobyl scares the crap out of me. I'm not very easily intimidated, but that is absolutely scary. If you've ever seen the some of the 60 Minutes pieces on that, where there's apparently a few people that still work there, or they go into the area for whatever reason, monitor things and take Geiger counters to find out how much nuclear radiation is going off in the area. And they have to play music over loudspeakers because it's so silent. There's no animals in the area. There's no birds. There's no rabbits. There's no dogs, cats, nothing. The whole area is silent. And so they play music because they're concerned that if they don't do that, the people that have to go in there and spend any amount of time working in the area might end up going insane. Okay, that's serious. So you can't trivialize nuclear energy like that and say, well, it's it's clean and it's wholesome and it's Boy Scouts and bunny rabbits and rainbows and unicorns. It is until somebody does something wrong. One or two miscalculations, and that's what happened with Chernobyl. Miscalculation, and then that led to a cascading series of events that created a meltdown. And then everybody's in big trouble. Okay, so if you're scared of nuclear energy like I am, don't allow people like Alex-Epstein to intimidate you, to just breezily say, oh, well, and act as though you're some kind of a extremist politician or some kind of a Green Party extremist because you don't feel like glowing in the dark. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the next chapter in the book, Hijinks.
Chapter 22. When, 3 months earlier, the office of the director was advised that a communication had come in from someone who described himself as a middle-aged Italian gentleman with very interesting information, which information, however, he would divulge only to the director himself and to no one else, the request had received routine handling. The letter was turned over to an aide. The aide wrote back to the box number designated on the letter to say that unfortunately the director was busy, but that he, the aide, would be glad to see Mr. Mussolini, as the letter had been signed, any time, at any reasonable place. That letter got back an urbane letter advising the aide that if the director was not interested in knowing what the internal fighting within the Kremlin was all about, perhaps the director should resign his position as head of the Central Intelligence Agency, and perhaps become baseball commissioner. The aide pondered the communication, its rather special élan, and made the decision to put the whole dossier into the director's inbox. The director studied it, sighed, said to his aide that the chances were 99 out of 100 that Mr. Mussolini was a crackpot, but, well, he told his aide to set up a meeting at a safe house. And so it was that Alan Dulles met Mr. Mussolini. Within 5 minutes, the director knew that he had drawn the 100th straw. The man he was speaking to was not there in jest, or to announce that he had invented an ingenious means of keeping the sun from shining over the Soviet Union until they all said uncle. Mr. Mussolini was in his mid-40s, tall and angular. His hair was full and black. His eyes were always amused, even when his features were solemnly set. He was well dressed. The director, dressed in his customary tweeds, thought him even rather foppish. And there was even a hint of fragrance there. Cologne of some sort. Not the kind of thing the director found endearing in men, but he had become resigned to it gradually after discovering that young members of his own immediate and non-immediate family of inescapable masculinity were going in for the new convention. Mr. Mussolini spoke flawless English, accented as if he had spent years in a British public school. Seated in the small Victorian drawing room with the 2 sofas, the coffee table, the fireplace, the bookshelves, the heavy oak doors, he began directly, autobiographically. I was a communist when I was a young man in Padua, and I went to Spain to fight with the Loyalists. While there, I became very good friends with a young Russian. We were over 2 years in that long war, and we saw everything. He paused. Absolutely everything, Mr. Mussolini said, was the best way he could put it. Mr. Mussolini had immediately volunteered on returning to Italy to divulge what he knew about the cynical nature of Soviet operations in Spain. They cared not a bit for Spanish democracy. They cared to govern Spain, to the Italian government, notwithstanding his loathing of Il Duce, its fascist dictator. The communists were on to him, but for several years were powerless to act. Finally, they caught up with him when the partisan movement had begun to prevail, and in December of 1943 he was sentenced to execution by a partisan firing squad, from which he was saved by an unexpected directive that came in through the communist hierarchy. And the man who signed that directive was my old friend from Spain. His old friend was in the KGB, Mr. Mussolini explained, and once or twice a year he would hear from him, through channels now consolidated, channels the details of which I would not tell to my father confessor, even though I tell him the most fearful things." Mr. Mussolini smiled. The director thanked him for the background and said that he must be aware that in the trade the director was engaged in, the counterintelligence people want what we call earnest money. Did Mr. Mussolini know what that term meant? Again, Mr. Mussolini smiled. Yes, he knew about earnest money. He assumed that the director wanted a scrap of valuable information to establish that Mr. Mussolini was on the level. And incidentally, Mr. Director, speaking of earnest money reminds me of just plain money. There will have to be some of that. Not king's ransoms, but not pocket money either. My friend needs to look out for the inevitable day when, if he is not shot, he will escape that dreadful country, in which event he would not wish to spend the rest of his life as a common laborer. And that day is not far off. The director replied without reference to the matter Mussolini had brought up. "Let's begin with the earnest money," he said. Mr. Mussolini's accents were now clipped, utilitarian. At the last meeting of the Politburo, it was decided that the foreign minister should attack the American hegemony in Japan and propose a separate arrangement between the USSR and Japan. You are telling me that Foreign Minister Molotov will make that public proposal soon, or that it will be confided to Japan's Prime Minister? The first. Something else, this is Tuesday. Before this week is out, Pravda will attack British Labour leader Clement Attlee for the criticisms he has made of the People's Republic of China since returning from his tour. That, Mr. Director, is your earnest money. When the next day the attack on Attlee appeared in Pravda, and on Saturday Molotov delivered a speech on the subject of the iniquitously close relationship between the U.S. and Japan, Dulles probed his staff to ascertain whether there had been any advance tips anywhere respecting the two events. The answer was negative. From that moment on, the director never hesitated to answer personally a call from Mr. Mussolini. These calls came irregularly, every 2 weeks or so, and each one of them cost the director, this only after a little haggling, $4,000 in cash. Today, Mr. Mussolini, meeting with the director in the designated safe house, was dressed in Austrian loden, positively gleaming in green and pigskin leather buttons and a huge belt. "I have very important news from my friend." The director, a little deaf, removed his pipe from his mouth and leaned forward. The Politburo is divided on how to react to the American plan to recognize West Germany. The section headed by Beria wants to retaliate by recognizing East Germany's independence, and then having East Germany take over the government of Berlin. Yes, West Berlin. Take over, in other words, what you, the British and the French, now control. Malyenkov opposes this, but Malyenkov needs, as I've told you before, shoring up. There must be, my friend informs me, some sense that he is making progress in his negotiations with the Western powers, even if that progress is measured only in terms of socio-political recognition. You're not suggesting we give up our plans to recognize a West German government? Of course not. But Malyenkov and Bulganian and Khrushchev need a response that suggests you fully acknowledge Malyenkov as the legitimate successor to Stalin, in the sense that no foreign country ever disputed that Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union. And here, Mr. Director, is something else. And though I do not wish to be crude about it, for purposes of our calculations, what follows will count as a separate communication. You understand my point? I understand that my agency will be paying twice for this visit. Exactly. Now, Comrade Beria is actively engaged in spying on Malyenkov, by means not disclosed to me, but he is actually reading Malyenkov's cables. That would appear to me as though he were ready to strike. Is Malyenkov aware of this? Certainly not. If he were aware of it, he would presumably strike first. No, only you are aware of it. Mr. Mussolini smiled. Ironic, no? Very ironic, said the director, picking up his pipe. In fact, quite incredible. Mr. Mussolini drew his head back coldly on hearing the word incredible. Now, Mr. Mussolini, I hope you don't mean me to take what you just said literally. I meant incredible in the sense of something very difficult to believe. But that does not mean that I don't believe it, merely that it is objectively difficult to believe. You understand the difference? Mr. Mussolini said he did understand the difference. The director pursued his point. You have told me on several occasions that Malyenkov needs shoring up, and we have taken steps to attempt to do this, though public announcements have not been made. But you are telling me now something very concrete and very dangerous, namely that Beria may be planning a coup against Malyenkov, and that if he took power he would proceed to communize Berlin and resist by force of arms any attempt by the West to keep this from happening. That is how I read the message from my friend. Alan Dulles rose. The money will be deposited as usual. Meanwhile, let me know instantly when you hear again from your friend. Mr. Mussolini bowed, his breezy smile dissolving any suggestion of servile deference. This was the 5th visit in which the director had met face-to-face with his informer, and he had made plans this time to have his valuable friend tracked. Accordingly, when he left the safe house, Mr. Mussolini was followed discreetly by 2 agents of the director. Mr. Mussolini walked circuitously, but soon entered nonchalantly 1601 Fuller Street, the Italian Embassy. It did not take long in the CIA laboratory's file of pictures of registered diplomats to establish that Mr. Mussolini was, in fact, Giuseppe Angelo, Deputy Chief of Mission of the Italian Embassy. And that, Alan Dulles said to his brother later that evening after divulging his news, settles exactly nothing. If Mr. Mussolini, Angelo's game, has been to tip us off to interesting but hardly earth-shaking advance information, Pravda attacks Attlee, so what? In order to establish his credibility for the purpose of misleading us concerning a serious matter, then he has made just the right gestures. If Mussolini is a direct agent of Beria, then friendly gestures by us to Malyenkov will hurt Malyenkov rather than help him. That might have been so under Stalin, his brother, the Secretary of State, said. Sounds too far-fetched to me to suppose it's true this time around. I would guess the best interests of the United States clearly lie in helping torpedo Comrade Beria. I agree. But how are we going to persuade the president to make up his mind? Nothing to it, Foster. All we need to do is get Joe McCarthy censured. Then Ike will let you go to Moscow to romance Malyenkov. That was a wisecrack. But it happened that the following morning the Senate, by a vote of 67 to 22, censured Joe McCarthy. That afternoon, President Dwight David Eisenhower authorized Secretary of State John Foster Dulles to announce that he would travel the following week to Moscow to confer with Premier Georgy Malyenkov respecting West Germany and other matters. Moreover, the President telephoned to Prime Minister Anthony Brogan, told him what he had agreed to do on the recommendation of his Secretary of State, and got assurances that under the circumstances, the British would proceed forthwith to invite Mr. Malyenkov to address Parliament, and that in due course, it would be discreetly revealed that while in Great Britain, Premier Georgy Maximilianovich Malyenkov would be received by the Queen.
And that was chapter 22 of the book Jinx by William F. Buckley, Jr. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. Until next time, remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.